All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session for the Undergraduate Research Professional Development Program on different approaches to using an alternative range of artificial intelligence tools across the academic research life cycle. My name is Justin Longo. I'm an associate professor in the Johnson-Schuyma Graduate School of Public Policy. For those of you who aren't familiar with what Johnson-Schuyma is, if you consider the kind of public sector equivalent to something like the business school, and of course you all have heard of a MBA or a Master's of Business in Min, we offer, amongst a range of programs, we offer a Master's of Public Administration, which is a graduate professional degree that students with an undergrad would take as further training to prepare them for a career in the public service. So if you were interested in working in the public service, you might do an MBA, but if you were specifically interested in the public service, you might come to us for an MPA, a Master's of Public Admin, and there's a range of courses and other academic activities you'd undertake in order to prepare you for that career. So I start with that premise because I found over my career in both being a student in public administration and now a researcher and instructor, there's not a lot of what I would call common understanding of what an MPA is. So I just started with that basic plug because we're always trying to recruit new students. And if this plants in your mind that possibility at some point in your future career, I'd be happy to hear from you about whether that aligns with your career and academic interests. But today we're here to talk about this range of AI tools, and I'm titled this, of course, Beyond ChatGPT, because there are a range of different approaches and tools and types of artificial intelligence, which I think are interesting for considering how we can use artificial intelligence in the research enterprise, in the academic research life cycle. Wendy is going to share with you, and I believe through the website for this program, a couple of documents. These slides will be available to you, but frankly, these slides are simply a condensed version of a more interesting document, a Word document, which she will share with you, which contains all of the notes, the links, the suggested readings that you might want to look at to get a broader understanding of the issues that I'll be talking about today, and the links to the tools especially, which I think is the most interesting part, the things that you might want to explore. And frankly, we will be exploring in breakout groups today. Much of the work today that we're going to do is in pairs in breakout groups. So I'm going to be sending you off into breakout groups to work with another participant in this workshop to just try out some of these steps along what I call the academic research life cycle, and how we can think about developing our research program, the various stages of what it means to do academic research, using a range of generative AI, or sorry, not just generative AI, a range of artificial intelligence tools. So these tools, as you will be aware from generative AI, things like ChatGPT, are really transforming and revolutionizing what it means to do knowledge work. And the way that these tools and, a range of AI tools are being implemented and being adopted within the research community are likewise revolutionizing what it means to do research and the different stages of research. I want to just provide a different screen share of a diagram which isn't in the PowerPoint, but I do want to just draw attention to this, and maybe I'll make that a little bit bigger. One more. Okay. And there we go. Okay, so this is what I call the research life cycle, and I didn't draw arrows between the boxes, but generally looking at this as starting from the top and moving clockwise through the different boxes. This is the stages we'll be talking about today, and on each of these stages, I'll be getting you to, as I say, go and work in a breakout group to just try some of these tools. So we start with research questions and hypotheses. What is it we're looking to research? And we start with a simple question, and then we move to actually developing researchable questions and formal research questions. Of course, we then have to go back into the literature and say, okay, what's already known about these research questions or about this issue, and what's been done so far, and how can we build upon that? So we do that through the literature review. Then when we decide, okay, what hasn't been done or what are we going to do, we would then look to the research design. How are we going to design our methodology so that we can get at this question that we're interested in. Once we've got that all settled, and of course there's issues like human research ethics that we might, or other research ethics we might need to be concerned about, we would then move on to data collection. Once we've collected our data, then we're going to analyze it and we're going to write it up. And dissemination, which we won't talk about today, is that sort of after stage of after we have finished the research and written it all up, how do we tell people about it and what we found. I'll go back to the PowerPoint now. I just want to give you that overview of the kind of sweep of things that I'm interested to talk about today. I want to back up for a second and mention something that I mentioned before we started today, and there are 3 people who will have the name Wendy Forsberg in the bottom left-hand corner of their own video screen. So if you can look down there and you're not Wendy Forsberg and it says Wendy Forsberg, just please go to the top right-hand corner of your video screen, the 3 little dots, click on that, and near the end of that list, you can rename yourself. And just if you could change the name from Wendy Forsberg to your actual name, that'll be helpful for the purposes of putting you into breakout groups. Okay. So what are we trying to do today? We're trying to identify what different tools are used at different stages of the research life cycle, that diagram with the multiple red boxes I just put up. Understanding where there are strengths and where there are some limitations of using these AI applications in research. We're going to spend a lot of time experimenting with these tools on this range of stages in the research life cycle. And then we're going to conclude with considering the ethical concerns and best practices for responsible AI use. All the time reminding you the basic metric you need to use at the University of Regina is listen to what your instructor tells you is allowable. So I use AI tools intensively in my teaching and in the learning activities I lead, but that doesn't mean that you're allowed to use it just anywhere you want to. You have to start with what your instructor allows in a particular course. If you're writing a thesis, you have to contextualize it in what's allowed within your particular program or within the general guidelines and regulations at the university. So just because I'm saying all this doesn't give you carte blanche to go off and use these tools whenever you want. You have to use them both within the framework of the appropriate use that's allowed within the institution, and secondly, to come back to the ethical concerns and the concerns you should have about your own development as scholars. Okay. So why is this interesting? As I say, I think this is a revolutionary time and a transformative time in a broad area of applications, but especially in research. I think that this is fundamentally changing what it means to do research, is both accelerating the opportunities that researchers have to explore interesting questions, short-circuiting and supporting a lot of the mundane and the things that slow down the research enterprise, and allowing us to explore, I think, more interesting questions and get more interesting and more useful findings coming out of research. There are the multiple stages I've already talked about, all the way from ideation through to design, collection and analysis of data, through to writing and dissemination. So we're going to talk about all those stages. And what is happening largely is that the traditional tasks that were performed manually by researchers and, as I say, really slowed down the research enterprise are being supported by these tools and allowing researchers to focus on the things that I think researchers are good at, which is asking hard questions, thinking about the implications of what is being found, and finding ways to accelerate and advance the entire research enterprise. So let's start with this first question of thinking about the research questions and, I guess more formally, the hypotheses. I want you to think about this idea of going from a simple question that you're interested in to formulating more formal research questions. So a simple question I might be interested in is, I notice when I'm biking around that about half the people I see are wearing bike helmets and half aren't. What's the research question that might be embedded in something like that observation? Is it, well, I don't know, are do bicycle helmets actually improve safety? Do they improve overall health outcomes? Not just for people who do cycle and might get in an accident, but for people who might not cycle because they don't want to wear a helmet or don't think that they can do it without a helmet. If we extend beyond that, the questions might become in a more policy sense. How can governments promote the use of bicycle helmets if we think that if we find that they are a useful thing to people wear when they're cycling? How do we increase the use of those of helmets through some kind of government action? And what are the range of government actions that we might come up with or investigate as to whether they're useful or not? On the surface, this is, and I know I titled this Beyond ChatGPT, but on the surface, this is one of those ones that ChatGPT is actually quite good at. Brainstorming is an interesting and useful use case for using a general generative AI tool like ChatGPT to simply engage in essentially a dialogue with the tool, to get it to ask questions and have it respond to you, and then ask further questions out of that. A specific one that I'm going to get you to investigate in this is a tool called HyperWrite, and a specific tool within HyperWrite called Brainstorming AI. I think I need to put this link in the chat because it doesn't appear that it's in my PowerPoint here. So let me just grab the link and put it in the chat so that you all have this. Okay. And there you go. Okay. So in the chat, you're going to find the link to HyperWrite. And what I'm going to do in a moment is put you into breakout groups with one other person. So there'll be two of you in each group. And I just want you to start with a simple question that the two of you think is interesting. Ideally, I'd like you to, either you can explore this individually, which would be fine, or maybe you agree that you have one question you want to investigate and you can investigate it together. But basically start with a simple question and iterate with HyperWrite on how to come up with researchable questions. And you don't need to go so far as a hypothesis, but you can if you decide you want to go that direction. But come up with interesting researchable questions that flow from your simple question that you're interested in. Okay, does that all make sense, I hope, to everybody? So in a moment, I'm going to send you off into breakout groups and take 5 minutes. So I'm going to call you back in at, it'll be 22 minutes past the hour. And I'll get a few people to volunteer what they talked about in their group, or we can also use the chat for people to provide their comments in there. Okay, so I see that there are, minus Wendy and I, there are 27 people in the room. I'm going to create 13 breakout groups. And I'm going to assign them automatically. You will be invited to a breakout group in a moment. And again, 5 minutes, and then come back. I'll bring you back and we'll talk about this. I hope that's all clear. Talk to you in a few minutes. So Wendy, I just sent a message into the breakout groups that I'm going to close the rooms in 1 minute.
Sounds good. You have on your screen then the pop-up that shows everybody's names and says close all rooms?
Yeah.
Okay. As long as you have access, I don't have to worry.
Okay. So we only had 2 people who were in a room by themselves. Okay, closing the rooms now. We should be back soon. All right, welcoming people back. We've got a few people who are still in the breakout rooms, so got 20 seconds left before the rooms close automatically. And as we're waiting, I'm going to ask people to think about if there's anyone who wants to share anything with the full group on that experience and what you found. Did you find it interesting, useful? Did you find the HyperWrite tool helpful to work with? And if there's any other comments that people would like to drop in the chat, that's another way of providing feedback on what you found through that first step. So if anyone wants to go ahead and open up their microphone, please do. I'll just mention a couple of things. What I find with using these tools for brainstorming is that they can be really helpful on both confirming some of the things I've thought about, as well as occasionally prompting me about something I hadn't thought about. So that's why I find it useful to use these tools for brainstorming, to open up a different perspective. The confirmation of what I was already thinking about, sure, that's gratifying, but at the same time, I think, like I say, most interesting to open up an avenue of inquiry that you might not have considered before. One of the things I do worry about when it does open up a new avenue to consider is putting me on a path that might not be useful. So occasionally, in the same way that generative AI will hallucinate things like research citations, it will come up with ideas which might sound interesting or seductive on their own, but can lead you in a direction that is not helpful for your research interests. Just something to be aware of. It doesn't happen all the time, and it's not something you can't back out of and identify, but just to be cognizant of that possibility. Okay. Amir, go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I would like to reiterate what you've just said. My question was something that I've been thinking on my own regarding concussion and using TMS protocols. And I asked that question. Give me a list of avenues that could delve into, and I picked the ones that were more relevant to me and regarding the equipment and regarding the tools that I had at my disposal. And it had interesting answers, but like you said, it suggested some things that I knew for a fact were not accurate or correct, especially in that particular case study that I was interested in. So I actually like did a little bit of a back and forth. So like, okay, so this was already been disproven, or like, for example, this thing that you suggested was not completely accurate. So could you, for example, take another look, take another research method into the available literature. But overall, it's actually pretty good in terms of suggesting ideas, but you have to be a little bit aware that not all of its ideas are accurate, especially if you already done the literature review and you know like some of it's like maybe have been disproven or like maybe kind of out of date, or there are new research that make the other ones obsolete.
That's a really great insight, Amir. Thanks for sharing that, because I agree entirely that without that sort of background knowledge, you can be led down a path that is not only unhelpful, but is against the wider findings that have already been revealed through the research and the literature. So having that background knowledge before getting into this is, I think, really helpful starting point to be reminded of. So thanks. Rashidul.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So using that app, I asked, give me a research question on AI use in public service. And I got the question, how can artificial intelligence be leveraged to improve efficiency, transparency, and citizen satisfaction in public service delivery? Now, my question is, can I directly use that question in my academic writing without any modification or any change?
Well, if I can sort of remember the question you articulated, I think it was so multi-layered that it would lead you in a direction saying, well, there's a lot here, but it's not to me a specific research question. So I think it needs further iteration to say, how do we identify the different parts of what you were talking about there? So if you can reiterate that question to me, and let me think about it one more time.
Oh yeah, my question was
What was the question you got from the working with the tool?
the Hyperwrite app. So my question is using ChatGPT or Hyperwrite. If I get any question, can I directly use that question to my main research or
I
any
don't.
sort of academic writing like conference paper or journal article?
So what I remember from the question that you identified as the research question, that I don't think it was quite precise enough to be something that you can directly use as the basis for a research study. So I think it would require further iteration to say, okay, we're on the right track here. There's some things that we want to consider about the use of AI in the public sector. But in terms of a researchable question, I think you've got a ways to go. So I wouldn't say, no, my work's done here. I can now go off and research this question. I think it was too diffuse. It was too multi-layered. I think it would need a little bit more work before you're ready to go. And I would say that for anything here. All of these things are going to give you outputs, which are a good starting point. But at no point can we simply take the output and say, oh, I'm done. Okay, put that in and let's continue on. Okay, thank you. Angel.
Thanks, Dr. Longo. I think I just want to clarify something. In the really interesting back and forth you just had with the student, I think there's two different questions here. One was, which you answered eloquently, like, would this be a good research question for my work? But then the other question that I'm thinking about based on your dialogue is this wider question of, if ChatGPT or Hyperwrite or whatever generative AI tool spits out a sentence, doesn't matter what sentence. Oh, this would be great in my lit review. Oh, that's a great way to phrase that conclusion. Oh, what a great research question. Like, doesn't matter what the content is. The bigger question is, can the student copy paste that phrase and put it directly in their paper without citing, or is there a citation method for that, or what's the deal with that?
Actually, no, yeah. But if you're going to do a direct quote out of one of these tools, it has to be treated in the same way as if you were using a direct quote out of some literature or literature paper, some research paper from the literature. So just because it was created by a non-human entity and it came out of a computer doesn't mean you can copy and paste it and say, this is mine. So you have to both identify the source of the idea as well as where it's specific language, identify that. So treat it in the same way as if you've got a research paper from the literature and you've got a paragraph, a sentence, whatever that you really like. If you're going to take a direct quote, you would directly quote it and cite that specific author and that page number. If you're going to take a direct quote out of one of these tools, you're going to directly quote it and cite that tool. And you can't do a page number, of course, but you would, and then you would have to give further information about how it was created. I don't know that we have fully, I would have to look up APA formatting these days, but I don't think they've fully come to grips with what was the prompt that led to the output. But I do know that there is a way in something like APA to say, this came out of ChatGPT. and here's the date, and I should have a little more. I know I can do this, but I haven't done it for a little while as to how you specifically cite that. So the simple answer is you can't take a quote and say, well, I wrote this, or nobody wrote this because it was written by a computer. That's not allowable. You do have to directly cite where it came from, both the idea as well as the specific, if there's a direct quote that you're taking out of that material. So to me, that would be the ethical and appropriate way of handling those outputs. Again, go back to what does the instructor say? If the instructor says these tools are allowed with proper citation, that would be the way to do it. If the instructor says the tools aren't allowed in the first place, well, then we're not even in the right ballpark. So we have to back up and figure out where we are and how we're going to handle this. But no, direct quotes, in my view, should be directly attributed to the specific tool with as much information for the reader to say, this is how I got here. So this is the prompt I used. This is the specific tool I used, obviously. Date matters because these tools are changing all the time. Does that get at is that helpful, Angel?
Very well put, Dr. Longo. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, why don't we move on to the next stage, the literature review stage of research, and think about how we traditionally do literature reviews, right? We start with foundational articles, we get a sense of the issue, we then look at the literature that article is citing or referencing, we then find that literature, we go from there, and we do this kind of network approach to saying, what is the literature saying about this concept, and can I get as much of an understanding of how the field is talking about this issue? When we start to introduce search tools, computer search tools in the last generation of doing this, we change the nature of this by saying we're using keywords. We might be using a tool like Google Scholar to say, what are all the articles that have used this as a citation or as a reference, and what articles refer to this particular article, and trying to more in a computer network sense, understanding the relationship amongst all the different pieces of the literature. Now introduce the overlaying of artificial intelligence on top of that, and we have a number of tools that are emerging that are making that process more automated and introducing automated summaries and the development of things that look like the starting point for a literature review, and doing this in a way that's is both more comprehensive in terms of looking at the literature, and at the same time speeding up the process of going through huge amounts of literature. So I've been involved in things like systematic reviews, which after doing standard search processes have ended up with 5,000 articles of relevance to the study. And then we go through a manual process of determining inclusion, exclusion criteria. Does it stay in the study? Does it exclude it? And then we get down to something like 1,000 articles. And you can tell how these can become so overwhelming that they become a kind of an industry in academia on their own. Systematic reviews are an important part of the research enterprise, but they're a response to the huge amounts of literature that's now available to us. Enter now these tools, and I'm going to give you a list of different tools here. Semantic Scholar uses natural language processing to enhance the search process and to extract concepts from the literature. Okay, Semantic Scholar has the benefit of being an open source product that doesn't have a subscription model or a fee attached to it. And most of the tools that I'm going to talk about next draw their information from Semantic Scholar. So it's a sort of foundation for doing all of this. One of the ones that I prefer to use these days is called Elicit, which is elicit.com. And Elicit uses natural language processing and large language models to find papers by searching through papers and citations and extracting and synthesizing key information. So if you're just getting started on a research question, Elicit would be an interesting place to start by starting with your research question and then asking the tool to tell me, where should I start looking at the literature? Okay, Research Rabbit does a similar thing. It uses citation mapping to focus on the relationship between different research works. So who's cited who and who's drawing from who, and what does that map look like? Lit Maps is another one that does a similar thing, LIT Maps, Lit Maps. All of these are available in the document you're going to be directed to later. And there's a whole bunch. There's a lot that are developing in this realm. So what I'm going to get you to do now in your breakout groups is to think about this question of use one of these tools, and maybe I'll just drop into the chat. Let me do a link to Semantic Scholar, copy that hyperlink and drop that in the chat. Excuse me, send this to everyone. Everyone. There's Semantic Scholar, and then I'm going to send you a link to Elicit, just because I find that one interesting. So using one or the other of these, or both for that matter, have a look at these tools and start with a research question. Now, the better the research question is formulated, the better will be the output. And Elicit is doing something interesting these days, which is it is offering advice on your research question as you're typing it in to the dialog box. So let me recreate the breakout groups. We're now at 38 to 39 minutes past the hour. Let's go to 45 minutes past the hour, and I'll bring you all back. That doesn't give you a lot of time, obviously, but I just want you to get a flavor for how these tools work. Start with a research question. Talk to the person you're in the breakout group with about what you're finding and what you think of this. And I'm curious to get some feedback when we come back in the room. So I've got 26 participants. I'm going to create 13 breakout groups. And see you in 5 minutes or so.
Hey, Justin, how's the pacing going? Are you going to be done at 11 or 11:30, do you think?
It looks like 11:30.
11:30? Okay, perfect. I gave everybody an hour and a half, so.
Yeah. There's a couple Wendy Forsbergs in the group that haven't changed their names. I'm just sending them a note to ask them to do that. They're probably just logged in without being actually paying attention to the.
Well, that or it is me in here multiple times.
Okay.
Because they didn't move to the group.
I'm just, whoever that is, if it's you, I'm just sending a message asking them to change their name if it isn't you. Okay.
It is very strange.
Interesting glitch. I'd never seen that happen where people had their names set to a different
Yeah,
name.
I've been having trouble with my Zoom the last couple of days, so might have to reboot when we're done, just in case. But Justin, other than research, what are the copyright issues regarding using things like ChatGPT? Do you know offhand?
So, I mean, the underlying really troubling issue is where is all the data that is driving this coming from, and how do we treat that? So if I ask it, if I say, I want to write a novel and I really like Stephen King's novels, so can you give me the opening paragraph for a novel on this idea in the style of Stephen King?
Mhm.
ChatGPT has used Stephen King's writing as the basis for training it how Stephen King writes. It's not taking language from Stephen King's novels and using that as the basis for creating that new novel entry or first paragraph, but it has learned from his writing on how he writes. So on the one hand, ChatGPT says, well, we're not plagiarizing. We're not taking his writing and just copying and pasting, but they are certainly plagiarizing in the sense that they're learning how his style of writing works. And so this is where the disagreement comes up, is what does it mean to plagiarize at that point if you're not actually, so how about someone who spent their entire life reading nothing but Stephen King novels and then sits down to write a Stephen King novel? Are they plagiarizing? We would say no, but that's essentially what ChatGPT is doing in,
Okay.
in terms of that. So the copyright issue is, where did it learn its model of how language works? And it learned it from all this copyright material. Okay? But now we can't disentangle that. We can't say where in the ChatGPT model is the Stephen King part, and can we take it out? We can't do that. That's impossible at this point. So I think the copyright issue on the front end is super interesting because it's learned how I write. I mean, I don't think someone can go into ChatGPT and write a paper like I write and get too much out of that. But it is essentially, when someone has a well-known body of work, that's how it's using that copyright material to create what is really new material, but it wouldn't be able to do it without that first having that copyright material as part of its learning.
Okay.
Yeah, on the output side, it becomes quite different, because if I do that, is that my paragraph? It wrote it, ChatGPT wrote it, based on a lot of inputs, part of which was Stephen King, but now it's my paragraph. So do I own it? Is that my copyright? And we're just not prepared for that world, because we don't know
Right.
what it means to create in this new world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about today is essentially getting at this question, what is the important part of doing research? Because in the past, we would have said everything from thinking of the idea to going and getting the information and translating it into your words and then doing the study and interpreting it and writing it all up. That's all my work. And now a lot of that work, I'm going to say, can be done by these tools. And then the question becomes, so what is it the researchers, I still think the researcher's doing important things, but it's doing something different than we've considered in the past.
Okay.
Yeah.
Donna's back.
Yeah, no, it's interesting questions. I'm going to close all the rooms and see what we've got from people on this round.
Yeah, no, I was just curious.
Mm-hmm.
To write a book or whatever, if it actually belongs to you or if it belongs to chat.
Yeah.
I'm not using it for my research, so I'm safe on that one.
Yeah, yeah, and then we've got this new transparency paragraph that you have to put at the beginning of a thesis or dissertation, which I think is a start. But I think it's going to be used too much as a fig leaf. It's going to be like, oh, I put in the transparency paragraph, so I'm good, without really thinking through some of these bigger questions, which are important to consider.
All right, I'll let you get back to it.
Okay, all right, welcome back, everybody. I hope that was an interesting little exercise. And as with the last round, if anyone has any observations, feedback, thoughts about that process, which tool you used and how you used it, I'd be curious to hear from you. One of the things I will say as a caveat or caution in using these tools is that they avoid you getting deeply immersed into the literature, which is part of the process of understanding the literature, right? Like, imagine if you decided that the only thing you were going to read, and this is one of my criticisms about systematic reviews, is that you're only going to read the abstract for every paper. Because when you get like 1,000 papers, that's about all you have time for. You start just reading abstracts and you miss all the detail. Like, what's the interesting background? What's the literature? What's the kind of, what's the methodology? What was the data instrument they used? What was the the findings, the analysis they went through and the findings, all of that stuff is really interesting. So because we're overwhelmed with so much information, we start to take these shortcuts, and I think we do it at our disadvantage, or at least we disadvantage ourselves by not immersing ourselves in the literature. So while I will say that these tools are really interesting to support this problem that we're all facing, which is there's too much to read and too much to make sense of and how that all fits together, and we need some kind of mechanisms to support that, I would really strongly advise avoiding the lure of doing that without going through the hard work of actually reading these papers and actually understanding, okay, who said this and what was the connection to something else somebody said. And it's not just that that's useful hard work to get better at and understand this literature. It reveals things that these tools can't find, because occasionally you're going to come across the kind of serendipity of just finding something because you were down a rabbit hole that you hadn't anticipated, and now you found something that hadn't occurred to anyone, and it wouldn't be revealed in one of these tools because that's not how they're trained to think about connections and relationships. Okay. Riley, go ahead.
I didn't have a lot of luck with this one, unfortunately. So the kinds of things that I was trying to query was about organic semiconductor materials and how they could be applied to like computer architectures possibly.
Okay.
I found not a single thing
Interesting.
through 3 different queries.
Okay, interesting.
So
If you've been looking at this issue, you must have in mind or have in your notes somewhere a paper or two on this topic. So you haven't, have you invented this, have you invented this idea that no one's ever considered before?
no, it's not as widely used in like high performance cases for trying to replace like silicon,
Yep.
because there's just some issues with like thermal capacities, the degradability of it. But there have been attempts before, but I couldn't even find anything like that.
Okay, interesting. So
I tried going along the research I'm currently doing over the summer as well with a polyaromatic system.
Okay.
Not a single paper about polyaromatics in
Wow.
that field.
Okay. Okay. Well, you've stumped me for certain, because this is not an area I know much about other than knowing that it exists as a research area. So I'm curious whether that's a terminology issue. So do we need to go back to the keywords, and are you using different words than some of the literature might be using? I mean, one of the problems I face is I use a particular term for an area that someone else uses a different term. So now we're trying to connect things that aren't connected semantically, but they need to be connected conceptually. There are, and I forget what tools in which you can essentially enter, Elicit would allow you to do this. You can essentially upload a couple or more papers to say, use this as the basis for exploring the literature more. So that should be one route that you can take. So rather than just use the dialog box, and I don't know whether this is a paid feature of Elicit, it might very well be, but that's one possibility is, okay, you know there's a paper or more that deal with this topic. Can you use that as the basis for telling Elicit, I'm interested in this topic, can you tell me more about it? Okay. But interesting that you found that sort of negative result from, as you say, a fairly niche area, but not one that is like, you're not hallucinating it. It's definitely an area, yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts before we move on? Okay, but like I say, the list, sorry, Amir, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I use Elicit for research questions, and I use different topics, and I found it a little bit, for lack of a better word, irritating that it changed the question to what it wanted to find rather than what I wanted to find.
Okay,
I had a specific question in mind that I wanted to ask, and he was just it was just suggesting, "Oh, do you mean this, or do you want me to look for that?" And I was like, "No, but I mean this is specifically. I don't want you to do anything extra or the thing that I didn't ask for."
Okay, that's a good observation. Yeah, the list will kind of think that it has a better question than you. I found that I forget exactly the mechanism by which you can reject that suggestion, but you're right. It's going to start to take you in directions you're not interested in, and so something to be aware of when using a list that as I say, as far as I remember and have used, you can reject those. And I forget the exact mechanism, but you can say, nope, not what I'm interested in. Stick to what I'm talking about. But thanks for that observation, Amir. Okay. All right, well, let's move on to the next question. We're coming up to less than 10 minutes to the top of the hour. Let's talk about designing methodology, because there's an interesting tool called Methodology Generator, and I'm going to put this one in the chat right away. If I can get this to react. Okay, there we go. Copy that hyperlink. And where's my chat gone? There it is. So this one specifically deals with the task of thinking about, okay, we've got our research question, we've got the background literature to know where the gaps are in the literature, and yes, our research question has some runway, has some room to think about the question. So what do we do next? Now we have to think about what's the appropriate methodologies, and how can we design a research study that can help us illuminate the unknowns under this particular research question. And Methodology Generator is a specific tool designed to assist us in selecting the most suitable research methodologies for this project. So in my particular discipline, we're dealing with, well, is this a qualitative study that we're designing, or is it a quantitative study? If it's a quantitative study, what type of quantitative methods are we going to be using? Same thing on the question of qualitative. In your particular field, you're going to have different questions that come up with respect to the methodology that we might use to think about this question. This tool will also raise issues around quality control, around data collection and ethical issues. So again, back to my question about either whether it's a survey or interviews or what have you, whatever method, it'll introduce all the ethical questions that we'll need to consider. And of course, we're going to have the human research ethics or other ethics clearance that we need to undertake the study. So again, take your research question, go into Methodology Generator and ask it some questions, work with it in dialogue to say what would be the beginning stages around using a tool like this for developing your methodology. I'm going to recreate the rooms, and we're now at 5 minutes to the hour, so I'll bring you back at the top of the hour and see if there's any feedback. How many people do we have? We have 26, 13 rooms. There we go. Okay, I'm going to give her one more minute, Wendy. That was not quite enough time to explore that tool, but I'm going to skip the breakout session for the next one.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to close the rooms now. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Any reflections with that experience? How did you find that tool? Anything that people found in using it? I have found in working with my thesis students over the years, this is one of the stages of the research enterprise that hangs people up on, okay, so how are we going to do this? Of course, the literature is really helpful in this, how have previous researchers looked at this question? So it's not like we're in a complete fog about how to do this, but in terms of the range of ways that you might think about designing a research study, I think that this can be really helpful in opening you up to some possibilities. It can be done with a general purpose generative AI tool like ChatGPT or Claude, but I found this specific one to be an interesting, more robust approach to understanding where methodology and research design fits within the overall research enterprise. So for the time being, I'm finding this one to be an interesting one. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. We're not going to do a breakout session for this next part of the research life cycle, but looking at data collection, there's a number of different ways that we can think about how we can use AI throughout the data collection phase. The first one that occurs to me is on survey design. So if I'm going to be deploying a survey, asking people for their responses, opinions, feedback, data on a particular issue, getting that survey to be something that collects data that is useful for your research, doesn't overwhelm or overburden the respondent, doesn't introduce biases, whether they are biases that are generated as a result of the language of the question, or in terms of our sampling strategies, introduce other kinds of biases. There are specific tools that can be really helpful. One of the first things I'll mention on survey design, because the U of R uses Qualtrics, all of the AI tools that Qualtrics is starting to build into its survey platform are not available to us through the license that the U of R has currently. So it's going to be some time before these tools become available to us as researchers at the U of R. U of S, University of Saskatchewan, uses SurveyMonkey, which has more leadership on terms of using AI in its survey design facilities. So for the time being, we're kind of left with generative AI tools like ChatGPT in terms of helping us design questions. And one way you can do this is, hey, ChatGPT, I'm using a survey to ask these questions. Here's one of my questions. What do you think? And it will provide feedback on whether that's a useful or problematic question. Rashidul, go ahead while your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So my concern is if we use AI tools in every step of research, like in literature part, research question generation, and methodology part, so will not our research lose its originality or uniqueness? What do you think?
No, I don't think so. I'm not so much, I'm not concerned about that because, again, I go back to your earlier question about, the tool told me this, am I done? I don't think you are done. It's a starting point to say this is helpful information. But if we treat it as a support and not a replacement for our own intuition, our own creativity, our own perspective and expertise on the issues, I don't worry about it. That's on us. If we diminish our creativity and our own input into these endeavors by letting the tool take over, then we've done that to ourselves. And I don't think it's a necessary outcome. I think that we can always come back to the foundational premise that these tools are supports for what we're trying to do. They're not replacements for what we want to do or what we're trying to do. So I can understand you raising the question and saying this might be an outcome, and maybe in some, if we're not careful, in some long-term sense, that can be an outcome. But from my perspective as a researcher using these tools, I don't allow it to override my own input into the question. So it does require us to be cognizant of that and come back to that continually. But it's not an automatic that it's going to happen. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So other than surveys on data collection, some ways that we might use these tools, there's ways to automate data gathering. So if we think about natural language processing systems, we can automatically gather and analyze huge amounts of text that cannot be done. In the past, our approaches to analyzing large volume text amounted to essentially counting words and phrases and saying, okay, what's the meaning of this corpus of information, because this word seems to be used a lot. But now we can use natural language processing on things like social media, information from data information from websites, digital archives. We can, I've had students look at citizen engagement feedback, so governments having citizen engagement forums that are getting huge volumes of text. What can be done with that? Well, essentially without natural language processing, which is a branch of AI, you cannot do meaningful text analysis that gets at the meaning and the semantic content of that information. Visual and audio data collection. So using computer vision and audio processing, we can systematically collect and classify multimedia data, whether it's images from cameras that are set up in the environment, whether video taken from camera sensors, or video taken from the internet, audio recordings from a range of different sources. All of those things can be done using these tools to help both capture that data and then on the next stage, analyze that data. There's real-time sensors, so you can manage sensors and even going to robotic systems that are collecting high-frequency, high-volume data in either lab settings or field settings. IoT integration, so Internet of Things, devices can be integrated with AI to not just collect data passively, but also in collecting that data, sort of reorient or refocus that tool, that IoT tool, to collect different things like ecological studies, public health monitoring, and in engineering research. We can do automatic filtering on the data that's coming in, and we can do data validation and cleaning as the data is coming in. So not as an after-the-fact process, but as data is being collected. And this matters when the volume of data gets so big that we can't afford to collect everything. We have to be more careful and selective in terms of the data that we're capturing. And then there's predictive modeling and simulation, in which we can have experimental simulations. So You can refine the data collection strategy before initiating a study that might be costly without having that simulation before the fact. So I was going to do a breakout on just the question of survey design, but because I don't think everyone's interested in survey design, we're going to skip that one for now. But again, in the notes that are going to be distributed, there's links to a bunch of different tools, and it all depends on the direction in which you're going or what you're interested in. There is one particular tool I really like for simulation modeling. So doing agent-based simulation modeling, there's a tool called AnyLogic, A-N-Y Logic, AnyLogic, that allows not just agent-based modeling, which in the classic sense of agent-based modeling requires the programmer, the researcher, to sort of direct the agents on how they're going to behave. AnyLogic allows for artificial intelligence to embed in those agents sort of a sense of almost agency or a sense of reaction to particular situations that aren't pre-programmed. So that's one particular tool I really like, but that's only if you're interested in things like simulation modeling. Okay, on the next topic of data analysis, because we are fast running out of time, I'm going to put in a link. Again, this is available to you anyway, and I will look at your question there. Oh, there's questions coming in the chat. Okay, thank you, Atif. Let me just put this in here and then come back to Atif's question. But while I do that, read the question. How can you ensure that your work remains authentic and avoid false AI detection while still using these tools effectively? Atif, you've gotten me on a subject that I'm, let me state this diplomatically, really interested in. This use of tools like AI detectors like Turnitin, I think it's a completely wrong direction to be going in with our learning environments and our research environments. If we need to rely on these tools, which have so many false positives that arise when being used, I just think it's the wrong direction to go in. They're not accurate. They are catching people inappropriately and unfairly and getting caught up because the tool said that the person cheated because they used an AI when they didn't, or the tool is simply identifying what is possibly likely a false negative. So I don't have a solution to this. You're asking the question, how can you ensure your work remains authentic and avoid false AI detection? I don't have a solution to this. You're in an environment in which the U of R uses these tools, can use these tools. Instructors can use them. What's the solution? From what I understand, people just document their process by saying, this is how I came up with the research question. This is how I did the literature review. This is how I came up. And if you're not allowed to use any of these tools, then if you can document that you didn't use any of these tools, I think that should be sufficient. But if someone's simply saying, nope, Turnitin said you used it, other than protecting yourself, I don't have a solution. I'm sorry, Atif. I'm sorry for people who find themselves in these situations, because I've seen it happen, and it's not nice. Okay. On data analysis, so I put Julia's AI into the chat. You can have a look at that. One of the things that I find interesting is the idea of taking data and starting with simple questions. Now, if you've collected data and you don't know why you're collecting it, you're going to have a problem. That data is not going to be very useful to you. But if you have data and you're, say, interested in how the data you have might relate to another data source that you've captured from a secondary data, how do they connect together? Some of these tools can be really helpful in helping to see where those connections might be. So if I've got data from a survey and I have data from StatsCan on the use of computer technology, it would be interesting to ask these tools to start to look at them and bring them together in some kind of, at least to start to see where some of the connections might be. And a tool like Julia's AI can be interesting that way. I have in my notes here, I guess, yeah, because I haven't distributed these notes yet, there is a very simple data table that I've included with the notes. And one thing you might want to try, just as an experiment, is drop the data table into either Julius AI or something as simple like a general purpose generative AI tool, and say, give me some feedback on what might be happening in this data. What are some possible trends? What are some deeper investigations that I might want to look at based on what we can see from this preliminary data? So it is, I think, a useful step to both in terms of you as an individual researcher looking at the data and starting to get a sense of what does it look like, doing some really simple descriptive statistics, for example. These tools can be useful to introduce you to the questions that might not appear on the surface or might be useful for considering later. Again, it's not going to do all the work for you, but it is going to open you up to some possibilities that you might not have considered before. So I'm looking at the time and wondering whether, you know what, I don't, because I do want to end on time. I don't think we have time to look at this, but I'll leave you with Julius AI as something to explore on your own and see whether it's something you think might be useful in your work or considering in your future work. Lastly, let me move to the stage of writing and argumentation. This is the one that we started with, right? This is where we started with this whole revolution in artificial intelligence, having firsthand access to tools like ChatGPT, taking our text and rewriting it. And we, you know, back to Atif's question about plagiarism checkers and is this appropriate? That's a bigger ethical question. In my work, I find that it is something I support for a wide variety of reasons, but whether it's Grammarly or whether it's a general purpose generative AI tool, it is something to think about the ethics of it, but at the same time also think about, are we learning the essence of language through working with these tools, not letting these tools do our work for us, but thinking about what is the nature of writing and understanding language, and do these tools help us in that process, or alternatively, do they undermine our actual learning of language? So, you know, the work I do, I help students learn how to write brief documents for government settings. And on the one hand, my colleagues might argue, well, if you never learn the hard part of knowing how to write properly, you'll never learn how to write properly. The alternative approach I'm investigating is, does helping you through the hard part of learning how to write properly make you a better writer in the end? And it's a long-term research endeavor to try and figure out where the right answer lies. So I'll leave to you to think about the impact on your writing, but I go back to the initial state, the initial foundation, which is, what are you allowed to do in your particular coursework or in particular research? And that is the ethic that you need to bring to your particular writing in that instance. A couple of tools I'll mention here that are more about the collaboration of writing. So using these tools as a collaborative partner, if you will. Let me put these in the chat. Again, these are available in the notes. One is called Jenny, Jenni, and the other is called Paper Pal. So let me put these in here. There's Paper Pal and Jenny. And I'll let you explore those on your own just to see how they work. They do work in sort of conversation. So you are iteratively prompting the tool. It's providing you with feedback and asking you questions. You're responding to the questions. And it is a process of how one might work in collaborative writing. So if I'm working with another researcher and we're writing together, if we were in the same room, for example, we might write together in that sense. So I find these tools interesting. They are a little more research focused and more focused on the research ecosystem than our general purpose Gen AI tools, but just things to think about as possibilities that you might want to explore on your own. Okay, So I think I'm going to have to wrap up because we're coming close to the end of our time together. What are the basic ethical and responsible use issues? Always consider the environment in which you're working and what is allowable. So whether you're writing for a research journal or you're writing a project or an assignment for a class, understand what's allowable and expected within that environment. So the instructor at the U of R should be very clear on what's allowable and work within that environment. That should be your first order thought about this. The second one to think about is what is the impact on you as a researcher, on you as a learner, on you as a scholar. So when I talked about the literature review, it can be tempting to think, well, these tools are available. There are thousands of articles I need to consider. No one has time to do that, so I'm going to take advantage of these tools to help me write my literature review. The problem that introduces is the one that I flagged, which is by not immersing yourself in the literature, you are not gaining the depth of understanding and knowledge about that literature, which is important for your research question. The depth of understanding is important for truly being able to maneuver within it. So to know when it's taking you down a false path, when it's opening up a line of inquiry, which is essentially a hallucination, and when it might be providing a helpful insight or a new perspective on the question. But without that foundational knowledge, you're not in a position to ask those questions as to whether what it's saying is useful or not. So avoid that temptation of using these tools as shortcuts that can have a negative impact on your long-term objectives and development, again, as a researcher, as a scholar, as a student. Related to that, as I said just a few minutes ago, the idea of learning how to write. Sometimes these tools can be very helpful in helping us in the process of learning how to write, but if they're simply replacing our writing ability and our learning of how to write well, then they're becoming a detriment to our long-term development, and we won't be able to function without them. And lastly, on the considerations on ethical and responsible use, think about the biases in the model outputs. Where is it deriving its foundational information from? And what is it doing in terms of us advancing the research enterprise if we are not cognizant of the biases that are built in because of the data that it's built upon? If we do nothing new in the future, we won't solve the problems that we currently have by relying on the knowledge that it's been used to train its way of thinking. So being cognizant of those biases, not being bound by them, not being blind to them, I think is a really crucial part of being an ethical and responsible user of this technology in the research enterprise. So just some final thoughts about ethical use in the research lifecycle. Use it as an assistant, not as a replacement. Always verify and critically evaluate AI outputs. I hope we all know this, that if it provides you with a citation, you shouldn't just look up that citation for the purpose of actually looking at that article, but you should at least start with saying, is that an actual article? This still happens where, it happens certainly on the model output, but this happens where people will say, here's a reference, and it turns out the reference doesn't exist. Keep detailed records of your AI usage. This is for your own protection as well as for your ethical reporting on this. So now at the U of R, we have a transparency statement that has to be in the front matter of every thesis and dissertation. Don't treat this as a perfunctory, I used AI. It should be detailed, how did you use AI? If you used one of the early tools we talked about to generate research ideas, that should be documented. If you used it in the literature review, if you used it in the designing the methodology, if you used it at any point in the data collection and analysis, all of those stages should be clearly identified. So keep detailed records as you're going along. Open up a separate document which is nothing about what tools did I use and how did I use them. It both protects you as well as is a transparent and ethical approach to reporting on your usage. properly attribute all sources and ideas. I didn't give you clear guidance on how to cite something, but you're all going to have different citation formats, whether it's APA or what have you. Learn how to appropriately cite these tools in your work, and you should be doing that all the way through. If an idea came from that tool, cite how it was generated, what your part in the generation of the idea was, and what came out of it, and how you use that in your own particular writing. I talked a bit about being aware of and actively mitigating biases. So the AI tools can reproduce existing biases in the academic literature. It can introduce its own through something like hallucinations. So carefully review everything that comes out and ensure it's inclusive, representative, and as much as you're able to, free of bias. And lastly, use it to enhance efficiency, but not as a shortcut for actual learning. And everybody is going through a learning process as they're doing research, whether it's as a student or as a researcher. Don't let it shortcut your learning process. Use it to enhance your efficiency, but not to shortcut the actual process of learning. I'll say one more time, truly immersing yourself in the literature, immersing yourself in these hard questions, thinking for yourself, writing for yourself is really instrumental in being an effective and productive researcher. So I hope that was helpful. I'm happy to leave the last few minutes for any questions. But as I say, this tool with a list of all these tools and links to all these tools, this document will be available to you. And indeed, I'm happy to have you reach out to me by email or on Teams and ask me any questions that have emerged from this. So thanks for being part of this today. Thanks for the invitation, Wendy, to talk to this group. And good luck with your research and studies.
Thank you, Justin. Anybody have questions?
All right, seeing all the thank yous in the chat. Thank you, everyone. But again, I'll stick around for a couple minutes if there's any questions that occur to people. Just realized I forgot to go through my last slides, but
Like everyone's good, it looks like.
okay. Thanks again, Wendy. I appreciate the invitation. That was a lot of fun. Hope it was
Thank you
useful.
very much, Justin. That was great information. I didn't realize there were so many tools.
It's crazy, and there's going to be next week. There'll be 20 more. So
Exactly.
it's hard to keep on top of, but please do share that the Word document with everybody. I think they'll find it useful to try a few of
I
those.
will. Thank you very much for all of that.
Okay, all the best. Bye.
Enjoy Victoria.
Thank you. I'll try. Okay, bye-bye.